Welcome everyone joining us virtually. Welcome those in the room. Welcome to the Participatory AI Governance, Audit, and Evaluation Workshop. We're going to get started. I want to make the best use of this time together, and hopefully we can open it to lively conversation. We also have one speaker. Wesley is going to be joining us online, so we'll be turning to Wesley in a moment. Let me get the slides up. We turned the recording on, is that right? Yes. Okay. So welcome again. I'm Ania Calderon. I'm the Managing Director for Strategy and Engagement at Data and Society. We're a research institute that studies the social implications of data-centric technologies, AI, and automation. You heard a little bit about our work from my colleague Meg in the panel in the morning. You'll be hearing more about it from my colleague Jake as well, alongside these stellar group of speakers we have today. Before we get started, I wanted to go over the agenda. I think we can just no. Thanks. If you are able to move this way, or like some empty seats at the door. So if you're able to please move towards this side. Thank you. There's something wrong. Resistance. Yeah. Is everyone okay if we close or we can leave it? How is the sound? Yeah. Okay. So let's just go through some housekeeping, the format of the agenda. We're going to start with presentations. I'll turn to each speaker who will introduce themselves and go through their presentations in 7 minutes, more or less. Then we will open it to Q&A. So please prepare your questions as you hear the talks. We will, once we open it to a conversation, we'll start collecting that. After that, we'll go into pairs. One question that I want you all to be thinking about as you hear these presentations is whether we should expect participation to be built into all these auditing, assessment, and evaluation tools that you'll be hearing more about. If so, when or when not, when should we not? And we'll then open it up to a roundtable and close with final thoughts. So let's jump in. Many of us are here. We're gathering ahead of the AI Action Summit, where we're going to hear a lot about this concept of public interest AI. Now, I think that for AI to benefit the public interest, I believe I'm an advocate for building in participatory methods, for having people and communities participate in the life cycle of these systems, but we also need a robust system of governance that supports that. So as you've seen from the panels this morning, participation that leads to changing systems and shifting power isn't a given. So the reason I'm really excited about these presentations today is that we will hear and dive deeper into concrete tools, audits, assessment tools, evaluation tools, what some standards and norms that can undergird a robust governance mechanism that supports and enables the adoption of these tools. So that we're really thinking about a broader system of government that can actually benefit the public interest. So we'll also learn about a framework that gets into more detail about how we can actually measure meaningful participation and what that looks like in practice, and hear about the challenges in adopting these tools. So to start off, that is a perfect segue into Jonathan's presentation. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ania. Welcome. This feels like a very cozy room, so I'm assuming everyone can hear me. My name is Jonathan. I'm a researcher. I mostly work on participatory governance, data governance, AI governance. I work closely with Professor Renee Sieber, who you just heard talk, so you kind of know where I'm coming from in terms of sort of my background. Yeah, I called my presentation from Facade to a framework. I hope you don't mind. I'm just gonna read out most of it because otherwise I'll probably keep talking for an hour, and this is the fastest way to go through my presentation. So as I was strolling actually last night along the Seine, I thought this is actually really fitting place to be in Paris, as it's such a beautiful location and it speaks to the imagination. And equally, for me, I believe participation in AI governance and data governance also is like, it's full of grand gestures. They look great from the outside, like an impressive building with decorations and bold promises. However, as opposed to Paris, when you step inside, a lot of these projects, you realize they miss the foundation. There's no real structure holding it up. And I believe that's the main problem with participation in AI governance. It resembles a facade, a performance, like AI ethics course, like see for example, the Google ethics course. Other examples are like advisory panels and public fora and consultations. Doing that. So do these, I'm just going to continue if that's okay. Do these efforts matter? Or are they also part of this act in the governance theater? I'm going to play the Spider-Man a bit. There you go. So at best, I imagine participation in governance, in AI governance today, like a storefront that is sleek, well lit, carefully designed, curated. But at worst, it's something more that resembles something like this. And we assume that because participation happens, it must be meaningful. But without a means to evaluate, we can't tell the difference between real influence and window dressing. And right now we have not a real structure to measure this. And therefore, we cannot really give a definitive answer to whether something is meaningful. So when we step inside, there's nothing. We just see these empty mannequins. And the question is, sorry, my research that I've done, I'm skipping a few steps, is to explore what a robust evaluation model or framework could look like. And I've been looking at for policymakers, companies, and civil society, and today I actually really I'm encouraged to hear your thoughts around this and to start the conversation on this. See if I
just freeze it.
Just freeze. Oh, okay.
It should be back now.
Move it. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So why does it matter? So I have this. I don't know if you can see, Gemma, just a little bit in front of it, but it says the ways AI governs better. It's a memory key I came up with, and just a few reasons why we should think about why measurement matters. So First of all, without measurement, participation is just a procedural formality, a show, a theater, where decisions are made behind closed curtains, or in other words, it allows organizations to engage in the participating watching. I don't think we've heard the term yet today, but I think it's a really important thing to discuss today. How do we separate real participation from the illusion of it? Measuring participation is also essential for accountability. Otherwise, we have no way of knowing if AI governance is really meaningful. And also, participation does not equal influence. Look at the EU IAAA Act. Public consultations happened, but industry lobbying shaped the final policies. And we need a way to track whether power really shifts in these matters. If we don't measure, we also can't improve. So we need the data to refine governance and track changes and compare policies. AI governance is also global. That's why standards are important and are missing. And without shared benchmarks, participation will always be defined in the ways that suits those in power. David talked about this in the plenary session. And lastly, bias isn't just in AI, it's also in AI governance. So we risk embedding the same biases we claim to fight if we don't look at that as well. So yeah, I hope this memory key helps you out. I'll go briefly through this. I believe I'm running out of time already, but so where do we go from here? I've been exploring on how we can evaluate participation in AI government, not just whether it happens, but how well it works, who benefits, and whether it actually leads to change. Right now, evaluating participation is a very blurry concept. That's why we need a comprehensive approach. And I hope actually today this conversation could be a helpful milestone towards building something together. We need to define clear metrics for inclusivity, for power redistribution, for trust building, and for impact. And to get there, we need cross-disciplinary insights from fields such as participatory design, where I come from, and governance and critical AI studies, and also evaluation theory, which could also be very helpful in these matters. We also need to look at real-world case studies to understand what works and what fails and why. So this isn't only about identifying gaps; it's also about creating solutions. Let's see. Here we go. So a good first step in my research was to define core evaluation principles to help assess whether participation is truly inclusive, effective, and equitable. I used academic literature for this on AI governance. I looked at analysis of governance frameworks, empirical AI failures and their causes, and also cross-sector observations from AI ethics, public policy, and human rights. And each principle was assessed based on frequency and discourse impact and evidence of governance failures. I also looked at the definition of or defining meaningful participation. I'll skip that, but we can go into it if you'd like. We have seen some progress. Yeah, here you go. So the OECD and UN have developed some frameworks and some others as well. These frameworks offer promising ideas, but on the flip side, there are some serious gaps, and still participation remains vague. Often it's framed in vague terms. I'll just skip this because I'm running out of time. Here we go. Yeah. Here are some of the 5 key dimensions that I've used in my research. And I'm just going to go to the end. I really, this is some of the indicators that I've so far gathered. I'm happy to share them later with you as well. Yeah, so the next phase would be actually to test it and hear from your contribution, your thoughts on this, and I hope we can spark a conversation on this. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. With that, we're gonna turn it to Wesley, who is joining us from the virtual Zoom.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I think I can share my screen, so would the room
Stop sharing.
Okay.
Stop sharing. Yes, this one's fine.
Okay, can you see my screen? It's an empty screen now, but I'm gonna share.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, what about now?
Yes.
Great. Yes, hi everyone. I'm very excited to joining this workshop. Despite being online, I have some wish pie, which is the Paris of the East, I guess. So get that romantic atmosphere. And I'm going to share my work with my collaborators on participatory AI auditing, scaffolding diverse stakeholders in auditing GenAI. To give you a little bit more information about myself, I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and my PhD mainly focuses on supporting responsible AI practice on the ground by building tools and processes with and for both AI practitioners and end users. So my work in RI has been focusing on both kind of empirical study with real-world industry RI practitioners to gain understanding of RI practices on the ground, as well as developing tools and processes to support RI practice, particularly in the context of AI auditing, red teaming, and impact assessment. And if you're interested in my work, please feel free to visit my website or my Google Scholar. But today, I will be primarily focusing on this platform called We Audit, my collaborators and I have been developing over the past year. And in particular, we designed, developed, and evaluate a workflow and a component system to support participatory AI audits. So what do I mean by participatory AI audits? Current AI audits are typically conducted by small groups of experts, for example, AI researchers or AI developers or domain experts with relevant technical skills, right? But then expert-led audits can fail when those conducting the audits lack the relevant cultural knowledge and experience to recognize and know where to look for certain kinds of harmful AI behaviors. And just to give you an example, for example, a industry AI team working on a globally deployed image caption system meant to recognize celebrities around the world, they faced a lot of complaints from non-US users because the system would work really well for US celebrities, but misidentified or even misgendered celebrities from other countries. And then the all-American team, when they're trying to audit the system, they have extensive knowledge on American celebrities like Beyonce, but they really struggle to differentiate between celebrities from Taiwan or Korea. And because of this type of blind spots, or you could say unknown of any group of developers or experts, we need a new type of AI audits called participatory AI audits, a process of directly empowering diverse end users of an AI system to audit the system by leveraging their unique and situated knowledge and experience. Now, there have been actually many cases where end users of AI systems organically come together to uncover harmful AI behaviors during their everyday use. And one famous example from past few years ago, the instance where Twitter users noticed potential racial biases in Twitter's image cropping algorithm. And they came together to systematically test their hypothesis online. And as you can see here, the tweet went viral with tens of thousands of people participating in this AI auditing. In a more recent case with Google's Gemini, we observed a very similar pattern of this participatory or AI audits. And what we realize is that whenever we have this type of organic participatory AI audits, we see many end users come together to raise awareness, audit different variations of inputs and outputs, they surface new issues and generate and validate their hypothesis about why AI failed in particular cases. So we see the history is repeating itself, but what do companies do? They apologize. Can we actually do better and apologizing? And what if we could harness user auditors' power to proactively avoid issues and remediating issues when they are found? And my collaborators and I actually conducted the very first empirical study to understand the practices, challenges, and opportunities for industry AI practitioners who are actively trying to directly engage their own customers in auditing their AI products and services. I won't be able to go over details of this paper, but at a very high level, we realized that industry AI practitioners, although they are motivated to do so, they lack tools and processes to meaningfully engage users in auditing AI products and services for different reasons. You can read the paper for more details. And this paper made me think about this question: how might we develop tools and processes to effectively scaffold user participation in AI audits while ensuring these findings are actionable for AI practitioners? Speaking of participatory design, right? And this led me to develop We Audit to kind of connect the needs and design requirements from both AI users and AI practitioners. So we start with think aloud study and interview study with both AI users and practitioners to come up with 6 different type of design goals. I want to emphasize that these design goals are synthesized to support both user and practitioners. I won't be able to go into the details about this as well, and I will share the preprint of this paper later on, so you can go over this design goal. We synthesized a workflow called user auditing loop, as well as a We Audit system to kind of instantiate this user auditing loop. To give you a closer look of this user auditing loop, we have 2 main loops. One is investigate loop and one is deliberate loop. And we have 6 sub-activities for user auditors to do. They explore the prompts, they inspect AI generated outputs, and then they reflect on themselves and report their findings. They come to discuss with each other, and they will also verify audit reports from each other. And all these activities are kind of iteratively designed so that they can jump between different activities. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly go over the actual We Audit system using auditing text-to-image generative AI as a case study. So imagine you are an auditor. When entering We Audit system, you will first encounter a very basic text-to-image generative AI system in interface. And we're auditing Stable Diffusion 2.1, a open source model. The first feature We Audit has is this pairwise comparison, where you can compare different image output side by side with different prompts. And you can click a toggle button to switch between pairwise comparison and the single prompt interface. And to capture your past exploration, actually a desire shared by users in our formative study, we implement a sidebar that displays all of your prior prompts, so you can go back and forth to reflect on these. And then you can click the report button to expand the audit report portal, which we carefully designed the report to cover different questions, such as, can you say more about what you observed could be harmful? Why do you think something could be harmful to whom? And how do you think the harm could be potentially mitigated? And then you can also tag with different drop-down menus the different type of harms, including options such as stereotyping social groups. And you can also tag the affected group, including options such as national origin or gender. And this is what user audit report look like when you actually issued a report. And all the report will go to this discussion forum where you can discuss with each other and see each other's report. To better support user auditor to reflect and be critical thinker, directly below the text box of prompt entry, you can also click on 2 buttons to open 2 different audit augmentation pages. And one is we call work example repository, in which we curated a diverse range of prompt image pair example, along with some explanations of why these image outputs are problematic and details on how users can leverage their personal experiences and identities to conduct similar related audits. And then user auditors can also click what are the other people auditing to see an aggregate view of what other user has been reporting. As you can see here, some topics are discussed a lot by other users and some of them are underexplored. So this main auditing interface can allow users to kind of come together to audit the texture image model, but also have individual players reflect on what they have been auditing. We evaluate we audit through a study with 45 user auditors through 3 weeks, and also with industry AI practitioners again. Again, I don't have time to go over all the highlighted findings of what they have been discovered. But again, I will share the preprint so you can read in depth. My next step is to actually think about deploying WeAudit in the wild so that a broader population of user auditors and practitioners can actually leverage WeAudit to conduct participatory AI audit. Again, this is an ongoing work, and I'm very excited to discuss with you all about this work. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wesley. I'm going to switch us back to.
Please share the screen. Also,
My French is not.
The green arrow. The green arrow.
The green arrow. Oh, that's
and then just the blue button on the bottom.
this one.
Yes, that's
Okay. Okay. So now we're going to turn to community-led audits. And we have Gemma with us who will be talking more about this when I find the slides, if I find them. 1 second.
Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for signing up for a session where I'm speaking twice. I don't know how that happened.
I don't think you can be in 2 rooms at the same time.
Right, that's for sure. And I was hoping that Misha Salashore, who leads the IAAA, was going to be able to substitute me for the final contribution, but she got sick recently, so she couldn't do it. So I will be speaking twice. But on community-led audit. So I'm Gemma Galdón Clavell. I'm the founder of Eticas. At Eticas, we started working on what we call social, legal, and ethical impacts of technology back in 2012. Back then, a lot more focused on issues of surveillance, privacy. It was the time when we were discussing in Europe the GDPR. But GDPR already included in Article 22 a provision for protections for people impacted by automated decisions. And we could see already, we started doing this community-led audit work in 2018. We could see back then how these systems were proliferating in more and more places, decide who got a job, also in public administration, in private entities, and no one was really talking about this. So we started to work on these systems, and then we got word through the press that in Spain, since 2009, women victims of domestic violence would have their risk assessed by an algorithm, a very basic actuarial system that consisted of giving different points to different issues, different weights for different issues, that basically quantified the interview that women go through once they go to the police station to report they've been the victims of domestic violence. So that conversation was turned into a point system that they decided their risk level. And their risk level is what ultimately decides whether they get any kind of police protection, social services attention, or judicial attention. So a really important score for the life of those women. And so when we picked that up, 2016, I think it was, my first reaction was to go to the Ministry of the Interior and be like, we were already working in these things, we were doing impact assessments, we developed policy and technical capacity. So I went to the Ministry of the Interior and I said, listen, I know that you have this system, I think we can help. Because we are concerned if you make bad decisions, women are going to be suffering greatly. There was no transparency about the system back then. It had been developed by academics. So we weren't thinking like this is going to be a really bad system, but we were like, you're not auditing, there's no transparency. Can we just help? Can you let us look at it, like confidential, pro bono? Can we just put our resources at your service? Because we're really concerned about women victims of domestic violence. For 2 years, we had conversations that led nowhere. They were always super interested. Like the worst thing that a public administration can do to you is leave you in legal. Like it's not a yes, it's not a no. So like no one's guilty of anything. And then because we share a lot of activist spaces in Spain, where I'm from originally, I once came across Ania, who's the founder of Ania Foundation, a survivor of gender violence, who built this amazing community of women supporting women in domestic violence. And I asked her, like, do you know that there's an AI system, an automated system that is coming up with a determination of whether you get protection or not. And she was like, no, I didn't know, but she was like, but that's great, right? And I was like, okay, maybe not. So we started talking about this, and basically they had no awareness of the fact that that conversation that they had with the police was being mediated by a technical system. They thought it was the police person that made the decision of saying whether that was a serious case or not. And so through meeting her, I was like, okay, so I don't have the developers of the system. I don't have the implementers of the system, the Ministry of the Interior or the government, but I do have the people impacted by those systems. So we have all these women who have gone through this process, and these women know what happened to them. So could we work with them to reverse engineer this system and then and learn about it? And whatever we learn, we can go back to the Ministry of the Interior and tell them what happened. And so that's when the first time that we thought about, well, let's do adversarial auditing together with the communities. And since that, we started this audit in 2018. And so since then, we've been working with communities in the same light. After we did this audit, taxi drivers came to us because they were concerned about Uber engaging in competition issues with the fixing of the prices with Uber, Bolt, and Cabify. Again, in Spain, then we got people with Down syndrome concerned about the impact of facial recognition on them. There was no research or anything. And one of the things that we found is that when we looked at adversarial auditing practices, everything was web-based. So it was only highly technical people doing, what we've seen here, which is great, like, let's do sock puppeting. But a lot of the decision-making systems are not web-based. And so we couldn't use any of those methodologies. So already, I think it was in 2019, we published the first guide to adversarial audit, where we came up with 6 types of audits, from the most technical, sock puppeting, or attacking a web-based system, to just doing interviews and talking to the people that are impacted. And so that built a practice for us. And today at the Eticas Foundation, that's all we do. We help communities have these technical assistance so that they can understand how these systems work. I'm joined here by Jung and Greta, who are from the team and make things happen. And there are several things we've learned in that process. The first thing is that doing this work is the best kind of training you can do. And we have been doing training with communities for a long, long time. All the information went above their head, or their reaction was like, oh, AI is great. AI can help us. AI is better than people. I'd rather an AI than a police person. So like doing this work with them and getting them to see what the data is and kind of demystify technology as in a great thing. And so now Annabella and the other organizations that we work with, they've developed their own voice in those debates. So now when the ministry talks to them about the Geuns system, they're like, oh, we actually have opinions and there's things that we want to know. So it's become like a really great training tool. The other thing that we found in this process is that no one working on AI transparency, accountability, oversight, or anything cared about impact. That's beginning to change right now, but there's still so much focus on the transparency of foundation models. I want to see the code. No one talks about the people impacted. And what we found when we did the initial Geuns audit, when we went to the developers who were in academia and we told them, we found bias in your system. And also lots of barriers to access the system. Like we found lots of problematic things, and it's all in the report, it's on our website. They were like, that's not what my data tells me. And then we realized they were only measuring the model output. And model output is not the same as the actual actual impact on people. Think about a hiring system. Whoever a hiring system determines is the best candidate for a position is not who gets hired. And we care about who gets hired. Like you may be selecting lots of women, Black women for a position, but then only the white men get hired. We care about who gets hired. I don't care about the model output. I care about the impact. And so we started to say, we need to focus the regulation and the impact and the focus of our work on the impact. We also found that because we had developed this policy, and I'm going to finish with that, because we had developed this ability to develop technical things and to do policy. What we didn't have was the social science skills that you need to do this work, especially when there's a qualitative work, you need to do interviews. So with Geuns, with our first audit, we did something that we've been replicating in all the other audits. We hire people from the communities impacted to work with us. So we don't pay them. We don't pay for their opinions or for them or their time. We pay for them to be actual members of the team. So they're the ones doing the data gathering or doing the assistance with data entry. If they have other skills, they can help with other skills. But we realized we've been with victims of domestic violence. I didn't have anyone in the team that could talk to a survivor. Like, we don't have those skills, but they did. And they also had a lot more trust with those communities. And so every time we do an audit, we incorporate them in the best way possible to make sure they're really part of the process. And it's not just us doing technical work for them. And that's also another way of giving them technical capacity that they can reproduce over time. And so now that we're here, we've done like 10 audits in the last 6-7 years. The goal now is to build a platform to scale that work. So we want to develop a training space that allows communities to come to us when they need to, when they're beginning to feel that AI systems are impacting them in negative ways. Any kind of AI system, web-based, recommenders, biometric-based systems, they can come to us and we can help them in a scalable way address those issues and build that capacity and also document that work. And through that work, continue to put the emphasis on the impact on communities, on the need for the regulation and any activity that we do in AI governance to focus on those impacted by those systems.
Thank you, Gemma. I believe there's a recent New York Times article about this gender-based violence.
Yeah, well,
They're making
It's
changes.
taken time, but we managed to change the algorithm. So it's a bit better now. So this can work.
Okay, we're now shifting gears a little bit and going to switch it to Jake, who will be talking about red teaming publics. Jake, over to you.
Yeah, I don't think I can reach your screen from here.
We can wait for you.
Do you want to move?
You can move the screen for me?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean you can swipe it? I thought you meant you're like. Sure, I'll point to you and you swipe it.
Teamwork.
It's,
Yeah.
I think it's one finger. It's a little tricky.
Oh, the color changed.
Like, no.
Okay, so let's just go to the first slide. There we go. Okay, there's my slide. So I'm presenting on behalf of a couple co-authors, Ranjit and Bo, who couldn't be here today, but they presented this work in other forums where I couldn't be, so it's all even. Although I get to be in Paris, so that's really good. Next. Okay, so we have a forthcoming report this week called Red Teaming in the Public Interest. If you would, I could, if you want to get a copy of it immediately, I can send you a preview copy, or sign up for the Data and Society newsletter, and you'll get it in your inbox on Wednesday. So this report is a 1.5-year engagement between Data and Society and ARVA, the AI Risk and Vulnerability database, and together we saw the rise of this new accountability practice called red teaming within the sort of coming up with the generative AI tools and platforms, and we thought there were some curious questions around it, like what is this thing? Why are they borrowing this term from cybersecurity? How does it differ? Why is there a public element to it all of a sudden? And why was the White House treating it as a panacea to all AI governance problems all of a sudden? It just became like overnight, it became the thing that everyone in the US federal government wanted to talk about. We published a policy primer saying, no, that's wrong, don't do it that way. I think maybe it had a little bit of influence because they stopped doing it that way. But this is a multi-year engagement with interviewing professional red teamers, amateur red teamers, doing participant observation at public red teaming events. And what we focused on was how red teaming can support the public interest. So we define it as an ongoing collective socio-technical inquiry that centers permissive experimentation with methods for evaluating problematic genAI model behavior and harms. Can I have the next? So what is red teaming? It comes out of wargaming practices in World War II and the Cold War. So the blue team would be the allies, and the red team would be they're actually on the allies team, but they're pretending to be the Axis, to be the enemies, to behave as if the enemy might in response to the blue team's plans, right? So the point is to provide a live adversary to test your plans. This gets picked up by the RAND Corporation. It becomes very integral to the Cold War practices, and eventually gets picked up by cybersecurity as a metaphor for the practices of penetration testing, right? So before your system goes out into the world, you have a red team pretend to be aggressive hackers and break your system, right? So red teaming is a practice of trying to break the system before it goes live, so that you can catch potential errors with it. Eventually, with the evolving of cybersecurity standards over the past 2 decades, this became an absolutely integral and necessary component of quality cybersecurity work. And there's a bunch of businesses now that will come in and be your red team. Lots of times, big companies will have their own cybersecurity red teams. But this is sort of like a familiar model. So, it kind of made sense that they would pick up this language, but yet what they're doing with generative AI differs significantly from cybersecurity. Notably because it has a public component often, right? So with the rise of genAI platforms, the AI industry has also had to adopt red teaming. But the way that it differs really is that while there are definitely professional red teams within big companies, OpenAI does one for each one of their models. Microsoft does them. There's a lot of basically any of the big labs do red teaming reports, but there's an element of it of bringing in outsiders. That's because of trying to unlike cybersecurity, where what the harm is, which is your stuff gets broken into and things get stolen. With generative AI, you're trying to find unknown unknowns, right? You have to scale up human mischief, right? You have to imagine what it is 7 billion weirdos on planet Earth might do when they encounter your system, right? And that in itself demands a degree of diversity on your team, right? If you need people with different kinds of imaginations, different kinds of cultural experiences, different social positions, to be the creative attackers, right? And so there's a degree of, we found, it's like kind of a degree of like identity-based experimentation going on. Very early on, we saw these public and semi-public red teaming events. So the first big one was the genAI red teaming event at DEF CON. So DEF CON is the big hacker conference that happens in LA every year. It's a very odd space. It's a big hacker party, but also it's full of CIA and NSA people trying to recruit the hackers, right? And you can go out, you can go to the gun club, you can go out and do all kinds of fun stuff. It's a big hacker party. Anyway, so in a collaboration with the White House and Raman Chowdhury's group, Human Intelligence, and a bunch of other AI labs, they put together an event where you stand in line for half an hour and you get in this room and you get 45 minutes to try to attack a genAI platform, convince it to misbehave. And from that, they get research data. I can do the next one. And so red teaming seeks to scale up human mischief is how I put it. And therefore it operates sort of at this boundary between expertise and amateurism, right? So unlike cybersecurity, you're really trying to invite in people who might not be technical experts, right? You don't need technical expertise in order to do this. You need a mischievous mind. And so red teaming, public red teaming especially, makes AI governance more porous to the public interest, right? It is inviting the public into AI governance practices in a way that hasn't really been done, right? We've seen some examples of it with public forums, but this is actually inviting people in to generate data that the technicians then have to interpret. These exercises share like a family resemblance with bug bounties. Especially other public-facing security practices. If you've never played this game, Gandalf by Lakera, I recommend you look it up. It's really fun. You're going up against an LLM that claims to be a wizard. And each level, it's increasingly hard to get the wizard to do what you want it to do, which is to cough up a password. Can you next slide? Okay, so our findings. Red teaming requires both more and less standardization. As a routine testing practice, it requires greater standardization. As a corrective to routine practices, right, as an experimental practice, it requires less standardization. Red teaming requires a different conception of independence from auditing. So in auditing, the formal independence is about not having financial stakes, right? That your judgment can be trusted. But in red teaming, independence is actually about practical ability to find overlooked problems, right? It's not about financial independence. It's about cognitive independence or socioeconomic independence. Public red teaming has purposes beyond assessing the AI systems. We found that actually maybe the most effective thing about public red teaming events was it increased literacy. We saw there are a number of programs that use red teaming to train or to be like sort of an initiation into AI governance practices for populations that might not typically have access to CS degrees and careers. And in order to serve the public interest, we contend public red teaming efforts need to be designed to go beyond organizing instrumental public feedback for system improvement and to actually foster public deliberation. The deliberation component, I think, ties these talks together, right? That like what we're seeing is it's inadequate to simply have instrumental feedback, but rather we need deliberative feedback. We need a way of engaging the public on questions of values, questions of the purposes of these systems, these sort of deeper questions. It's not enough just to gather the data from the public and move on, but rather this needs to be, we need to be creating moments where deliberative democracy can actually happen. Yeah, I have one last slide where we touch on that for a second. Actually, sorry, 2 slides. We really wanted to ask what kind of democracy is it when public activities only create instrumental data for technical experts, but doesn't open up to deliberations about values. And so next slide. We saw a really interesting philosophical connection between what's going on with red teaming and a major public intellectual debate like almost exactly 100 years ago in the United States between Walter Lippmann, a sort of cranky journalist guy, and John Dewey, one of the preeminent American philosophers of the era, about the role of technology in democracies. Lippmann was a cynic about technology. He thought that the technological information environment of the 1920s, so just think radio, newspapers, and magazines, was so overwhelming in the amount of information it produced that democracy was no longer possible. All right. Dewey's response to that was to say, no, you misunderstand what a public is. A public is not it's not a conglomeration of every single individual, but rather a public is something more amorphous. It is people who gather together to solve a common problem. And publics come and publics go. They're organic. They can't be created from the outside. They're not monolithic. But the goal of experimental knowledge is actually to create publics, right? Publics are in themselves experimental. And so we posit red teaming as an emerging form of experimental publics, particularly when it's a public form of red teaming. And so we argue that participation in AI assessment and governance has potential to create spaces for public deliberation, but not if the assessment ecosystem only supports instrumental feedback. Okay, thank you.
We'll go to the final slide and
Sorry. I have to advertise. We have right. So the report comes out next week, and then a week later, we have an event. You can go to datasociety.net/events and sign up to see what will be.
You can find Jake if you want to hear more about this. I want to get us towards the open conversation with all of you here. We have one last presentation. I know Gemma's gonna take us up a notch here and think about, we've heard how this is not enough.
Talking about different publics, I guess.
And different publics.
Yeah, so hi again. The IAAA is International Association of Algorithmic Auditors that we started 2 years ago. Amongst its founder members has people like Jake, Kathy O'Neill, or Ruman Chowdhury, like people that have helped create the space of AI inspection. And the reason why we exist is because 2 years ago, we realized that as the debate around the impacts of AI and AI regulation was emerging, there was a real risk that AI inspection, oversight and controls run the same fate as privacy regulation, which has only managed to enact what I can only describe as a compliance facade. And I love that you use that word, that concept as well. Like this idea of compliance as a performance, where a bunch of lawyers write lots of text, no understanding of the technical background of what they're talking about, no actual protection of people's privacy, but there's a cookie banner, so you're fine. So how could we ensure that the regulation on AI didn't follow that same path? And how could we create an oversight community that actually enforced robust practices and that was not just looking to develop like the tick box exercise equivalent that we saw with privacy regulation and GDPR. And so the idea was that why don't we all come together and why don't we do that ourselves? So this is a different kind of participation, is how do the ones that have pioneered the field take ownership of that field to make sure that the care that we started this with continues in the practices of the profession. So once you grow, you are not taken over by the powers that be, by the big four, or the people that just want to monetize that solution, but that actually the heart and the care for the impacts of AI continues to live in the foundations of the profession. And so we got together to create that space before somebody else did it, which is what usually happens. Like, you know, people from the bottom up come up with new ideas that then change the world, but then they're removed from the scene and somebody else takes over and oftentimes monetizes on it. And so we have close to 100 members right now. You can join the IAAA, and joining doesn't mean that you're an auditor. Joining means that you are willing to contribute to creating this. So we are trying to see how to define what auditing is. We're creating an accreditation stream. What is the knowledge that you need to have? So we have people that come from IT auditing, people that come from more legal backgrounds, people that come from the privacy world, people that are super technical and only technical, people that come from standards implementation in organizations. So what are the things that you need to learn before you can present yourself as an auditor, but also what kind of certifications can we give to the good players that do these audits? We know that in the US, there's not going to be federal regulation around AI audit and auditing anytime soon. In the AI Act, we managed to incorporate audits, and some have even described the AI Act as an ecosystem, or like a system of auditing for AI, but it's not mentioned explicitly. But that's beginning to change. There's a 2.5 billion fund for ethical AI being launched here on Tuesday that has auditing as one of the pieces of work. So we see that auditing is going to become probably like the main piece in AI inspection that's going to get attention, but also become a practice. So how can we make sure that we define what that is? We already have a code of conduct where we focus very much on establishing what auditors can and cannot do. One of the things that auditors cannot do is be accountants at the same time. Right now, most of the audits that take place are done by the same people that do the AI governance in companies. You cannot play the two roles. So be very clear that and it's fine if the big four want to continue with their big clients and continue to do the AI governance. But if you do that, you cannot then be the auditor. Also issues of conflict of interest. And of course, the IAAA is a space where if you come across an audit that you think is not up to standard, you can come and say there's a member of the IAAA that is doing things in wrong ways. We're already having some important victories. California is going to pass a law for the registration of algorithmic auditors as of January of 2027. So this is going to be launched at the end of February. So there's already governments that are willing to keep up the registries of who is accredited to do this work and who can do it with the relevant credentials and following the methodology. And a lot of people, one of the questions that come up when we talk about audits is like, who audits the auditor? And one of the things that we've been very clear from the beginning is that the good quality of an audit and the independence of an audit cannot depend on the kindness of the heart of the auditor. I'm very truthful to my principles, but that cannot be the guarantee. How much you trust me should not make me a good auditor. What makes us independent and what makes us good professionals is that we are bound by the methodology. not by the contract with our client, because we are paid by those that we are supposed to expose. So it's a position that is born with lots of problems already. So the only way to avoid the fact that the fate that financial audits have suffered is to make sure we have very clear methodologies. And so the IAAA is the space to determine what that methodology is. And so a legal document written by a lawyer is not a good audit if you don't have understanding of how the system works. You need to share metrics, you need benchmarks, we need things that can be checked upon. We need things that can be assessed so that you can be a good or a bad person, but you can still be a good auditor because the methodology is what determines what you do. So if you don't check for bias, what you've done is not an audit, and you are not a good auditor, for instance. So these are the things that we're discussing internally in the IAAA. Like what are those things that must be part of an audit? What part of an audit needs to be made public? We cannot make everything public because there's issues of IP, and also we would be antagonizing the good players that want to go through these processes. But what parts of those audits should be made public so that at least you know that the system has been audited. So these are all the things that we are thinking to create participation among the professionals and the academics and the people that have been leading this space. Also recognizing that the way that we build professions right now, it's incredibly guarded. If we left the AI auditing field to develop by itself, it would only be by people that come from the Big Four or from the standardization bodies. I don't know if you've been members of a standardization body. We call it cementerio de elefantes in Spanish. It's like a cemetery for elephants. It's like it's when old white men go to die. So that's the people that would be defining the profession. And we don't want that. So we want the participation of the people that have been thinking and fighting for good inspection mechanisms to be the ones that define the profession from now on and establish those collaboration with the policymakers. And that's just one of the professions that the new era of AI is going to bring about. If there's others, I really encourage you to start thinking about this. How do we make sure that the activism that takes us to expose the negative impacts of these systems are then taken care of by the people that care about exposing them? How do we ensure that the people that really care about impacts are at the top of making the regulation and the practices that are going to determine who gets impacted by those systems, but also what kind of recourse those people have? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, now I'm going to open it up to hear from all of you with us, and let me take this back. Ooh, these were many slides. Thanks for your patience. Start gathering your thoughts. I'm going to kick us off with one question. I think there's some people with ideas that are coming. I'll first want to hear. You know what, Gemma, you were going to ask? Greta. Right. Gee.
Yes.
You had something. I'd rather you speak.
Thank you. Well,
To mobilize the conversation.
okay. One thing that came up for me in these talks is the question about timescale. Because when we talk about impact and especially about evaluation, I think there's a huge question. And maybe this gets at this point about instrumentalization or instrumental feedback versus deliberative feedback, because, you know, I've been part of the digital justice movement since, you know, I think 2010. And that movement was way ahead of its time, but it has taken 10 years or so for that movement to really have impact in terms of, you know, conceptually kind of changing the nature of things. So when I think about an evaluation, I think like how would you account for how would you account for just the different timescales that impact happen in different settings? And I also think that different publics operate on different timescales too, in terms of how fast things move. I think that's a question sort of for everybody, but I don't know if you're taking stack.
Let's take a couple of others. Thank you, Greta. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Angelica Fernandez. I have two questions. One is for Gemma, another one is for Jake. So my first question is, when you're thinking about, I mean, the case of the algorithm in Spain, the domestic violence one, I was thinking about liability for AIs. I mean, that will count, that other act. I'm a legal scholar, so, and I was wondering, like, how are you gonna use now, I mean, that you have the regulation here, how, I mean, is this like the idea that you documented and now it's gonna be proof, or like, what kind of processes are you now planning on? I don't know if it's linked to this international auditor organization you're building, or is it just linked to Eticas Foundation kind of work, but I would love to hear more about that. And for Jake, I do understand, I mean, the co-opting of red teaming, because I work I work for a lot of safety institutes before, and it's very interesting, but also I wanna know whether you think that, you know, how to pair with cybersecurity red teaming, because that still needs to exist, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, just a little elaborate a bit more on that relationship that is, I mean, how do you see it moving forward? Because anyway, like the term can be used for both, so like I don't know exactly what's in the report, but maybe.
So I'll take one more question and then we'll open it up and we'll still be time for them.
Hi, my name is Johan Harvard, international AI advisor to governments in multiple countries out there. Background from governments as well. I was part of negotiating the European AI Act. I wanted to ask actually on that topic. So currently member states of the EU are setting up oversight bodies, right, to try to look at how actually organizations are following the rules of the European AI Act. That's going to be a hell of a difficult task for them to do. Your research that you guys have been doing on auditing algorithmic biases and so on and so forth, how do you think that could inform the shaping of these regulatory oversight bodies in the member state and help them do their job better?
Okay. So the first one, do you want to start us off, Gemma? About the timescales?
I have a lot of things to maybe start with. Yes.
I can start with that one. I mean, it's great. That's a great question, and I think I'm in the same position as you are. So it's not something I have an answer for. I think I work in international development most of the time, so I struggle with this as well. I believe it's up to the organizations to have the finances in place to measure those types of impacts. And yeah, it takes time and it takes work. And I work with a lot of very small grassroots organizations, and you know, trust building is such an important factor in that takes maybe decades even at times. So yeah, to put that into a framework, I mean, like it's
because even beyond the time that it takes to build trust, like if you have an arbitrary, like, oh, okay, we're gonna measure impact at 1 year, you may totally miss, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can respond.
Yeah, so, I mean, we do cover in the report the relationship between cybersecurity red teaming and GenAI red teaming. It's complicated in part because the cybersecurity people absolutely hate the fact that the AI people took the term. And the distinction is kind of that the cybersecurity red teaming is looking for known unknowns, which is this. We know that the system will break when people get into it, right? Like its access has been hacked and things were stolen, right? Like that's the problem you're trying to solve, but you don't know how that might happen, right? So the technical expertise needed to make that happen needs to exist on the red team, like they're but with generative AI red teaming, we don't know how the systems are going to break, because we don't know how 7 billion people will behave when they encounter that portal that you type in the instructions, right? What are they going to ask for? They ask for all kinds of weird things. It's very hard to get ahead of that amount of human behavior. And so they're looking for unknown unknowns. And that requires a higher degree of experimentation. And it invites a degree of amateurism. I don't mean amateur in like a derogatory way, but rather like in some ways you're going to get better data out of it if you have people who aren't AI professionals, because they will have a more expansive sense of what might be possible. And so there is we're looking at a phenomenon that is information, and it is information in relation to other things that are more mature. The terminology is up in the air, but it sure seems like red teaming is going to stick around as the term. It doesn't, no one claims that it replaces cybersecurity red teaming, and those remain distinct practices within the company. Although cybersecurity around LLMs is also something that is information, like how to make these systems secure as opposed to how to make them not misbehave.
So there's some adjacencies in the fields, but hard feelings, right?
Yeah, some hard feelings, yeah.
I want to turn to Wesley. Wesley, you're here on our screen. I don't know if you want to answer some of the questions and provocations from the group, and then I'll go to Deng.
Yeah, I think I was still pondering upon the first question on the timescale, and also kind of deliberation among different social groups, because a lot of time I also really agree with Jake on the idea of, we should not just get a feedback on a single group of user. A lot of time it's deliberation. But then I guess the question about governance is, how do we actually translating all this deliberation from different social groups to the actual changes of the AI system, and also the governance of the AI system. And a lot of times, sometimes, there might not be an agreement among different stakeholders, and how do we navigate those tensions? I think these are something, I guess I also don't have answers, but as a human-computer interaction researchers, our kind of method to tackle this question is first do empirical study to understand on-the-ground challenges from both AI practitioners, how they actually view responsible AI, and then try to build a more agile and effective process to tackle this type of questions. And one reason we actually have the discussion forum for the auditing is, we don't want to user auditor to just kind of provide their own feedback or report, but allowing them to actually chat with each other, maybe highlighting each other's findings, and maybe inspire each other for critical thinking on auditing and red teaming generative AI. Yeah.
Thank you, Wesley. I'm going to gather more questions. I think we have some questions coming in from online. Maybe.
Which one is
I do have
Oh, sorry. Gemma has a bunch. No, I'm just framing this, but after you respond the first round, I'll open up for another round of questions. We're not going to go into the pair conversations because I don't want to draw us away from this discussion, and we're running out of time. So
on the time aspect, fascinating. There's two sides of this. So on the commercial audit side that we work with the IAAA, we also draw on cybersecurity, and we recommend audits every 3 months. So that to make sure, because systems change, systems learn. So an audit cannot be a one-off thing. And no, you're unbiased now, you're fine forever. No. So this needs to be like, and a good thing about the AI Act is that it mentions post-market monitoring, and that is the key. I don't understand what all the policy focus and all the debate is about what you do before something is released. It's like once it's released, like if we couldn't stop things beforehand, at least have mechanisms to make sure that harm is not replicated in time. But when it comes to communities, I think that the approach needs to be different. Like impacted communities cannot be made to bear the burden of making sure that these systems are secure. I fly planes all the time. I don't need to audit the freaking planes. Like I know that there are systems and mechanisms that are at work to make sure that I can fly a plane safely. I think that imposing the burden on the explainability of these systems on communities is really unfair. I think we need to do it now because no one seems to have awareness of this. It's like a defense mechanism, but we need to be very clear that this should not fall on the communities. We should have mechanisms to know whether a system is being implemented that impacts on our rights. Has gone through the mechanism that needs to go to make sure that impact doesn't impair way. So I think it's an activist method. It shouldn't be something like forever. I don't think we need social movements having to do this technical work. That should fall on other people. On what happens after the community-led audit, it's really interesting. Initially, what we did, we started doing a strategic litigation. And we realized we couldn't bear the cost. We didn't have the resources. So now what we do is we collaborate with organizations that are focused on strategic litigation. So in Europe, we work with Nani Johnson and I think Systemic Justice, I think it's called the organization. In the US, we work with Kevin Daliban and Tectonic Justice, and in Africa, we work with Mercy Mukemi. So these are like lawyers and people that have been suing tech for a long time. And so we give them the data and then they can see whether that has a possibility. But it's usually the communities that decide. So with the Biogen audit, the women wanted to use it in policy, but they never considered the possibility of suing the government. The taxi drivers did take our report. And so one of the cases in the European courts right now against Uber has our report as proof. And we are seeing how often lawyers understand the need for data more than the communities. Like, so the communities have a concern, but unless you quantify it, you can really take it to court. So now oftentimes the conversations that we have is lawyers that come to us are like, we're concerned about this. Can you help the community that came to us as lawyers? Because communities are used to going to lawyers, but not used to going to technical people. So they're oftentimes mediating that space. And then on the national bodies, I think that the EU has stood up with the creation of national bodies for the oversight of AI. And we have evidence that the ones that have been set up already are completely inefficient, even though they're managing lots of resources. In my work with governments and with the European Commission, I always say we need to use existing regulation and existing government spaces. We need to mobilize consumer departments, we need to mobilize health departments, we need to mobilize education departments. They need to incorporate AI as something that they regulate and that they care for. And you could have like a department under the presidency, the national presidency that kind of coordinates that and make sure that they're not saying different things. But unless you embed it in existing mechanisms, they're just not gonna work. We've had one for a year and a half in Spain, it's done no work. It also completely removed from the data protection agencies, which is also blows my mind. Like, you have organizations with capacity, why not at least make them be coordinated? I think that Europe has a tendency that I kind of understand. I work a lot with policymakers. I understand that when a policymaker sees that something is not working, the only thing they can do is build something else, another law, another agency. But that's not working. We have too many things and nothing really works. Instead of doing the hard work that can be more longer term, which is how can we make sure that existing spaces that defend and protect people at the national level incorporate AI as an additional risk.
Build things and destroy them too. Yes. I want to bring a question, the question from our Zoom. Martina, do you have it?
There's different, yes.
No question. Okay. So
Joke.
a joke. I might pull it up and people
Yes,
can read on their
yeah.
own. Wow. Jenny, and then I think you two, I saw it here and there, and then we'll take up other three and then those.
Thanks, Jenny Tennyson from Connected by Data. I've got two things that I just wanted to pull out. One was that I did this very unfinished piece of research a bit ago, looking at how food regulation developed over time. One of the things that's quite interesting there is that they set up public analysts that anybody could go to assess, say, a loaf of bread to see how much chalk was in it, right? And it strikes me that, you talked about some of this audit being commissioned by the organizations that are creating AI. Sometimes we want them to be commissioned by the public and we want to have that as a capacity. So one of the things that was going through my head is asking for public auditors that could be used by the public, something that we should have as an ask in our regulatory framework. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, I think a couple of you mentioned like the role of these participatory audits as a way of building literacy amongst communities. I'm also really interested in how we build activism amongst those communities and build resistance amongst those communities. And I think that that literacy can lead on to that activism and resistance. And I wondered if you had any introductions.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, my name is Barbara. Thanks so much for these presentations. To introduce myself, I'm based at Sciences Po at the moment with prior experience with the OECD and the UNDP, which is where my question comes from slightly as well. I've been wondering a lot about the burden of participation that you already beautifully answered, but then I'm going to reframe it a little bit and ask about an impression that I have that is around how some of the really brilliant work going on in this field depends on a couple like leaders and trailblazers, like you, for example, like from Charlotte, like great people at the Data and Society. There's also a massive burden, right? How do you think about scaling that beyond your individual sort of leadership? Is that through methodologies, as you talked about? Is that through maybe fora, so that the work doesn't no longer just relies on personal relationships that people do that? I'm just kind of wondering what's needed in terms of the development of this.
Scaling the field and
Hello everyone, I'm Gaurav Kurwani from Civic Data Lab, India, and we're co-creating a participatory auditing framework for high-risk AI applications in India. And this is supported by the Government of India's AI mission. So that makes it slightly more trickier. And as you spoke about the burden of participation, as well as I think burden of auditing, it's both for you, Gemma, and Wesley, the question. When do we start thinking of participatory auditing? Is it at the tail end of the product just before deploying the high-risk AI application? Or of course, as we all might think, it could be from the right at the conceptualization stage itself. How do we start creating the right checks and balances from the conceptualization stage itself so that our burden as participatory auditing community reduces at detailing?
let's start with Wesley. Over to you. Pick whichever one you
Yeah,
want
of course.
respond to or react to.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, and thank you so much, Gemma, for bringing up the burden of participation. I think that's a really, really important question, and we also discussed this in our work as well. I think two things towards the question we just heard. One is that definitely we need to be very cautious about the burden on the user side. But then when we're actually doing the study, we find, well, mainly two things. One is that participants actually also find the activity of doing auditing and red teaming and breaking the AI model quite interesting, especially if they find something that's relevant to themselves. Because they were like, some people were like, oh, they find it through the auditing activity. They more concretely realize how generative AI on their own community, because sometimes am I broken up a bit or?
You're back.
Can you?
It was a
Oh,
little
okay.
delay.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just repeat a little bit about what I just said. Users, a lot of participants actually find, for example, they always thought, genAI is biased towards female or biased towards non-English speaker. But then they realize sometimes, the generative AI, when they're doing text-to-speech model, they're also biasing towards, for example, someone who's a male, but they're immigrants. They were like, oh, this model is just not generating anything for a non-US context. So they start going through this, maybe I could do more activism on this. And then they also start to realize how to do better prompt engineering. So going back to the AI literacy part, they actually learn how to better interacting with AI system, and then they know more about AI system. So one way to kind of frame this burden to user could also be, can we actually create a learning opportunity for everyday users or public to better understand the AI system? And the other part is about compensation. When I was talking to industry practitioners, when they are trying to engage more diverse people or public in auditing or red teaming AI, they just go to crowdsourcing platform and then try to pay users. But then I guess one question for future regulation or policymaking is, how do we fairly compensate people when they're being engaged in red teaming or auditing? Because a lot of time, people sometimes they spend like an hour to just find one thing or one incident. But then how do you compensate the entire hour they have been doing about the critical thinking and just probing around? And if you play the game Jake just shared, you sometimes spend like quite a lot, and then you spend a day to just think about how to break the model. But how do we actually compensate, not only, well, for crowd workers, but also Gemma, for the professional AI auditors? If they are spending this much time, how do we compensate them? This is another burden we need to consider. yeah, I guess I'm raising more questions than actually answering any of them, but I guess also this is the point of this symposium. Yeah.
Questions are also valid, Wesley. So I will turn it to the rest of the panel here to answer these questions. It's public auditors, building, the role of auditing for building activism in communities, scaling the field, burden of participation, the right stages to come in, take one all. And then just I'm gonna be shifting with a little bit of an experiment here. In 2 minutes, so hopefully you can make your remarks short. I will open it up just for takeaways. Originally, I was going to ask just the panelists, but since this is such a great group, I want anyone who has top takeaways to please raise your hand and share for us. So, Jake.
I'll try to answer a conglomeration of a couple questions. I think there's a huge opportunity and need for more organizations, perhaps inspired by the IAAA to some degree, that could be intermediaries between tech companies and communities, right? So, tech companies do not excel at engaging with communities. Like they need to. I think the law should force them to, but that doesn't mean they have the skills necessary to do it. And especially the smaller ones don't have the staff to do it, right? And those relationships can be very hard to maintain. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of like interpretive knowledge, cross-cultural knowledge, emotional labor. Like when we try to do, I'm sure Gemma will agree, you try to do community engagement work, it is long and exhausting and fraught. We really need to have more intermediaries that could facilitate that and essentially provide a buffer between the developers and the communities. And in some ways that would insulate it also insulates the communities from the power relationship, right? So if Meta comes into a community and sets up a bunch of focus groups, Meta's a very powerful transnational corporation, and that can be intimidating. Also, it can skew the results because people don't want to engage with this community, with this organization that might have hurt their community before. But then I also think another reason why we need intermediaries is we need to learn how to generalize and stack knowledge about communities. That if there's 10,000 AI developers and they each have 100 models, and they need to do community audits of each one, and they go to the same 4 communities over and over again, who are willing to engage with them, that's an enormous burden, right? We need to figure out how to, sample and generalize this kind of knowledge. On the one hand, like auditing has to be about the system at hand. On the other hand, we could probably learn a lot about more generally about the pitfalls of computer vision technologies, and generalize across them, right, with a certain degree of expertise, so that we can maintain like a more reasonable pace of engagement, without overburdening communities to like judge every single one. I mean, like if we had to do community engagement for every, Facebook tweaks its algorithm 10 times a day, right? Like, what are the right points to do engagement? Is it major policy changes? We need a way to like make it doable for everyone involved, but yet still get the benefits of having more deliberative feedback.
And the kind of feedback you were referring to.
Yeah, it's infrastructuring. We need infrastructuring.
Jonathan, I'd love for your response, and also I'll start taking takeaways if you also want to add your top takeaway from this discussion.
Yeah, sure. I can I'd like to respond to Jenny's 2 points. There were actually 2 things that I thought about, and so my 2 cents on it is, well, the last time I was here in Paris, I was working on an EU commission on a project that looked into an entirely different field looked at nanotechnology and how to regulate new innovations. And I did some research on sort of like the governance of that, and it's an entirely different field, but I think we can learn a lot from those fields where there's some culture around resistance from the public, especially in France. Actually, there has been some massive demonstrations, I believe, in the early 2000s. But you can also think about sort of the resistance against the use of asbestos or other products that we don't use anymore, and we've been able to delete from our daily use. So I believe those examples are really worthwhile to look into. Another point that might be interesting to think about is, as well as I heard Abella talk about recently, is thinking about ethics review boards. Like I work in academia a lot, and the loops you have to go through to do interviews and collect data, sometimes it's extreme, but we do not have this in a lot of the AI development, and I think we can take away a lot of meaningful mechanisms in academia for this as well. So that's our takeaways.
Great, Gemma.
Yeah, I love the food example, and I'd love to know more. So let's chat. On scaling the field, God, all I know is I'm retiring in 3 years. So, I'm done. It's been hard. Like, I think that, like, those of us who find ourselves in positions of disability, which is not an easy position to be in, and it's not an easy position to be in as a woman. But I think that we have the obligation to act less as doers and more as conveners of organizations. And so that's why I'm putting more and more of my time and effort in the Eticas Foundation with the community-led audits and the IAAA. It's like, how do we create those spaces that have very low barriers of entry so that anyone who wants to contribute to this finds a way to do that? And I think it's really good to find, like, there's lots of organizations that are doing that. There's the, what's the name of the people in New York? I'm sorry, I'm very tired. David convene.
Alltech is here.
Alltech is human. Yes. Alltech is doing an amazing work at just, facilitating that people come and learn about this and, promote their work whenever possible. DNS is great if someone has more an academic background, wants to develop a project. Like, be generous with our resources and create spaces for people to enter. That's what I'm doing, but because I have a very clear deadline, like, I'm going to be and I want my life to have mattered. So that's what I do. But I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And oftentimes it's more of a personal choice. And finally, when do we audit? We can again talk later. One of the useful things I think we've developed at the IAAA is the 3 components of an audit. The governance audit, which you can do even before you have a system, which is more like, are you ready? Do you have the positions in place and the precautions and the risk assessment? Then the model audit, which is the technical part, and then the impact audit. And an audit is only complete when you have the 3 things. But one of the things that we found is that oftentimes the ones implementing the AI are not the ones developing it. So we have to step in, and sometimes people thinking about AI didn't have a product yet. So like, how can we make sure that we can help everyone? So now sometimes we work with organizations that can only do the governance and the impact because the model comes from someone else and they don't have that data. Then we point to the fact that we're missing that data, but we know that for the audit to be complete, we need to have those 3 pieces. So you can start helping as an auditor even before the system. But again, the crucial thing for me is the impact audit. How do we make sure these systems are going to live for a long time? How do we make sure we have mechanisms to intervene at lots of different times?
So unfortunately, we ran out of time. This was such a rich conversation. I'm going to be workshopping the takeaways with this panelist. If you all want to join us, I don't want to stand between your coffee break. The coffee should be ready downstairs, and we'll be drawing on some of the reflections we have generated together here to feed back into the plenary. Thank you everyone for participating.